Hello, I'm Kaiser. Welcome to another episode of Thursday Night Deck Building. Today we're going to do something fun. We are going to steal a starship. We will then take the starship for a ride and solve missions. We will sell it for a lot of profit, and we will still end up with our starship and take it for a ride into the sunset. Here's how it goes. What we need is a card that I've always wanted to play with but never got around to in a proper tournament. And that is Vintaak Drydock Station. You can see it in the upper left corner. Probably you can read the text there. It's a time location. Many people don't like time locations because they find them difficult or too complex or whatever. I'll talk you through how to use it. And what's interesting about this one is that you can't report personnel there. When you play it, you will download the Starship Defiant there from outside the game. It is under nobody's control, not yours, not your opponent's. It will be up for grabs. Whoever gets the first and fulfills the requirements laid down here in the game text box gets to command the Starship Defiant. What's interesting about this time location here is that at the end of each of your turns, so the player who seeded it, you will flip this over. It's a double-sided card. And the Vintaak Drydock Station turns into the Vintaak Disappearance site. Let me just do it that way. Yeah, now you should see it. And this basically allows you the same thing. It allows you to commandeer the Starship Defiant using the requirements given here. They are different than the ones on the front. But what's really weird here is that this part of the time location, the backside, is in the alpha quadrant, whereas the front part is in the mirror quadrant. So that means to seed it, you need the corresponding mirror quadrant mission. I'm going to show you in a moment which one that is. And then you can fly your forces there. At the end of your turn, you will phase over into the mirror universe, or in this case, the prime universe. And at the end of the turn, the next turn, it will all revert back. So you can use this to travel through quadrants, which is what we're going to do in this deck. And as you might already have seen, the Starship Defiant has a special download in its game text box. And this is an ability called Terran Flagship Predator, and we are going to use that. Okay, what do we need to set this up? So let's have a quick look. We are in the Mirror Quadrant. We are playing Mirror Quadrant Federation, as we've done in various shows in this series. That means we are going to use Mine Dilithium as the mission where we have our main reporting location, the Halcyon Council. So that's the Terran Empire original series time location. This is where we will play, guys. We have Observe Spatial Coordinates. This is the corresponding mission for our time location here. So that corresponds with the Vintaak Drydock Station. And also, we have decided to include Examine Disappearance Site. Now you see that it also says Spatial Interface. So this is the Alpha Quadrant version of this mission here. Meaning, whenever Vintaak Drydock Station flips, a ship that could travel from Drydock Station to Spatial Coordinates can then move from Disappearance Site to Examine Disappearance Site. If that's still confusing, you'll see in a moment how it works in practice. We'll also have Disrupt Alliance and Visit Parallel Universe, mainly because they provide useful downloads that we get in the in the mission phase of the seed phase. So Visit Parallel Universe gives us crossover and invitation. What this does, it allows us to report a personnel native to the Alpha Quadrant into the Mirror Quadrant, but only once per turn. So we cannot freely use all our alpha guys in the mirror quadrant, but once per turn we get one exemption. That's why there are a few very good alpha quadrant personnel in there, but not so many that they will clog our hand all the time. And Disrupt Alliance. When seeded, you may download one emblem card. That's, of course, emblem of the Empire. It immediately allows us to download the Art of Diplomacy. And both of these cards can be useful. The emblem, apart from the download of the Art of Diplomacy, also allows our Terran Empire guys to battle, ignoring the Federation affiliation attack restrictions, so we can actually shoot at stuff if the opportunity comes up. And the Art of Diplomacy is useful because it allows us to use double treachery or 2 treachery on various personnel as if it were 1 diplomacy. And diplomacy is a bit short in this deck, so we can actually use this one. If we don't need it, we can always use it to get another hand weapon, which might also be useful in certain situations. And there's also review mining operation in the alpha quadrant, so we have planets and space missions in both quadrants, and hopefully that makes it a bit difficult for our opponent to know where we are going. Okay, we have the standard setup of a Q's tent and something that allows us to play alternate universe cards. We have Temporal Conduit, mainly for its time travel ability, and Temporal Micro Wormhole to allow us the general reporting of alternate universe personnel. We don't really need them because most of the people we play will be native to the Halcyon Council time location anyway. And if we report them there, we don't need a doorway that allows us to play alternate universe personnel. But if we want to report them to the Terran Outpost, for example, then we need something that enables that. All right. Our other seed cards are Defend Homeworld, because we need this to make sure we have everything set up on the first turn. Protect the Timeline gives us a second free play at the Halcyon Council, though it must be a unique personnel. Assign Mission Specialists, as always, gives us a head start of 2 personnel that must report at our outpost. We have Ensign Davis and Chief Pitcairn here. Taking Charge will be used to download some of the very good objectives that give us bonus points. We're trying to do a 2-mission win. 5-year mission gives us simply an extra draw if we stick to all TOS personnel, and this deck has exclusively TOS personnel, so we will never lose that. So that's an extra draw. And Study Divergent History. You probably have seen this several times on the show. Probably the most efficient draw engine. We must seed it, in this case, on a Mirror Quadrant ship. That's the one downloaded by Halcyon Council, so that's the ISS Enterprise, and in the seed phase we will also immediately trigger its download of a Terran Empire Original Series personnel, James Tiberius Kirk, and also trigger his downloads of Classic Communicator and the Tantalus Field. We don't necessarily need them all the time, but they are good to have. And what we then have is the download of the second time location. The Vintaak Drydock station requires us to download Starship Defiant here, and it is uncontrolled. Let's look at the text in detail. Seats on table, download Starship Defiant here from outside the game, uncontrolled. Any player may beam personnel from their ship aboard Starship Defiant. Usually you cannot simply beam aboard uncontrolled or aboard ships or facilities that are not under your control. Here the text allows us. And we may commandeer it. That means we can take control of it, change it to an affiliation of the personnel we bring over. So if we bring non-aligned, we can turn it into a non-aligned ship, or if we have a different affiliation, we can turn it into that one. But most importantly, we then can use that ship as if it were our own. And to do that, we need 2 engineer, officer, security, and strength greater than 50. So that's quite difficult. That's on par with some of the best dilemmas. However, we can do this on turn 1. So what do? You've already seen that we start the game with James Tiberius Kirk and our 2 mission specialists. What is very important here is that you try and seed mine dilithium next to observe spatial coordinates. Usually when you're the only player in the mirror quadrant, you have no trouble setting that up. If you draw mine dilithium first and then something else, just seed it on one side. If you pull observe spatial coordinates next, put it next to the mission you want. If you pull the other one, just move it out of the way. But if you're the only player in the mirror quadrant, you are guaranteed to set this up. If your opponent is also in the mirror quadrant, things are going to be interesting anyway, and our strategy will have to be adapted on the fly. The alpha quadrant missions don't matter at all. Seed them in between your opponent's missions to make the life miserable. Examine Disappearance Site is a 4-span mission that can make things quite tricky. If you suspect that they are playing a very aggressive deck, you might want to keep them to the side. Ideally maybe with the planet mission to isolate the space mission from your opponent to make it a bit tougher to reach that one. But against decks that are primarily solvers, you are usually well off just putting them in between their missions and make it a bit harder for them to move around. All right, so ideally we want to get the Starship Defiant. We want to steal it on turn 1. We need Engineer, Officer, Security. Security, Engineer, Officer we already have, so all we need is lots of attributes to get the strength and a second Engineer. And I'm going to say that we are going to draw an Engineer in our opening hand. I'll shuffle the deck again, and I'll draw my opening hand of 7 cards. And let's see, yeah, there's an Engineer, there's an Engineer, there's an Engineer, there's another one. So we went a bit overboard with the Engineers. The math actually works out to have a 95% chance of drawing an Engineer. Peter talked about mathematics of deck construction last week a little bit, and I'd like to take the opportunity to show you how I usually do this. So I go to a website called AetherHub, and what it does is it does the math for you. So in my deck, I have 42 cards. The sample size, that is the cards that I will draw in my opening hand, is 7. Success in population is the number of cards that have what I want. So in this case, my Engineers. And I think I have 14 Engineers in the deck, might actually be 15, now that I think about it. And successes in sample is how many of those 14 do we want. In this case, all we're looking for is 1 more Engineer. So we put in 1 here, and then it will tell us what our chances of drawing that card in our opening hand are. And as you can see, it's 95.6% in 1 game. As Peter said, he usually does his maths for 3 games. So how big are his chances of pulling this off all the time? You would then have to multiply that percentage with itself, so it will still work out around 90% or something like that, to make sure that you have an Engineer in the starting hand in all of your games. Okay, the other thing is we need attributes. And again, there is a very good chance that you will draw at least 2 personnel that have enough strength that, together with our Defend Homeworld download that we'll do in a minute, we will get over the hump of 50 strength that we need. I think for the strength, the mathematics works out actually to be over 99%. We really don't have a lot of non-personal cards in the deck. So let's just play. We want to get an Engineer in play, so let's play Chief Engineer Scott as our free play with Protect the Timeline. It must be a unique personnel. Then we can report another Halcyon Council free play. We might just take Ensign Cajano. And then we still have our regular card play. In this case, we could also play Raina Capac. She's an Alpha Quadrant personnel, but she can be our once per turn exception with crossover and invitation. So they all report to the Halcyon Council. And then we will immediately discard Defend Homeworld to download a security personnel. And in the tent, we find Security Chief Zulu. And he will immediately download, probably from the deck now, a classic Type 2 phaser. And then we are set up. We beam them all up aboard the ISS Enterprise. Let me just put these guys here and everything aboard the ISS Enterprise in a crew. The Study Divergent History is also seated on the USS Enterprise. I'll just keep it on the side. So, Protect the Timeline allows us once per turn to travel between the corresponding spaceline location and its time location. And since the ship is native, it will not be stopped, as per the game text on Protect the Timeline. While we're here, we will reveal our taking charge and say that James Tiberius Kirk is actually a captain, so he can use taking charge, and he will download the first objective on one of our missions. We'll probably start with Prepare Landing Party. So the idea is to complete Mine Dilithium and examine Disappearance Site, which is why I have seeded the off-cell vase, our bonus point artifact, under Mine Dilithium. Okay, we haven't used range yet, so we'll fly to observe spatial coordinates. We'll beam over our mission specialists. And then, since we're at this baseline location, we can now move to Vintaak Drydock Station. And that's where Temporal Conduit comes in. It says twice each turn you may place a card from hand beneath draw deck to relocate your away team or staff chip from a time location to the corresponding space location, or vice versa. So we need to put a hand under our deck. Let's just take Chief Navigator Chekhov, send to the bottom of our deck, and then the ISS Enterprise can travel to that time location, back to the year 2155. The Vintaak Drydock Station allows our guys to beam over to the Starship Defiant. And let's see what we've got. We've got the officer, the double engineer, and we've also got the security. No, sorry, that's the security. And our strength will be 8, 15, 22, 28, 35, 42, 48, and with the classic Type 2 phaser that Security Chief Zulu downloaded, all of our guys, since they're all TOS personnel, will get another +2. So we will get from 7 guys another +14, easily putting us over. So usually, even with a starting hand in which you will only find 2 personnel, it will work out that you will get a combination that has the necessary strength, or that can download either a hand weapon or the mirror dagger to give you a little attribute boost, and that will be all that you need. So we have successfully commandeered the Starship Defiant, and we can then use it. What I try to do here now is keep some guys aboard the ISS Enterprise as a card draw engine, and my guys will be James Tiberius Kirk, Chief Pitcairn, Anson Davis, and ideally another Alpha Quadrant personnel. Usually you will find one in your opening hand, so in this case that's Rainer Kepak, meaning I have the Mirror Alpha for Study Divergent History to draw 2 cards, so I will stop them now to draw 2. And then they will just stay aboard the Enterprise at the time location. With Temporal Conduit, we will then be able to move once more, to time travel once more, and here we will put all these guys that are not needed for the draw engine on the Starship Defiant. Take another card from hand, send it to the bottom of the deck to make the Starship Defiant travel forward in time. This doesn't require range, so we will fly to mine the lithium, and we can then attempt that mission, and that's what I suggest doing on turn 1. Before you do that, use the special download on the Starship Defiant to download Terran flagship Predator. What does this do? It plays on your unique non-mirror ship at a mirror quadrant location. So it's an alpha quadrant ship, but we are here at the mirror quadrant location. Ship now gains the mirror quadrant icon and the Terran Empire icon. It is attributes all +4. This is huge. This ship is now attributes 10, 10, 9. So we can even pick a fight with somebody. And each staffing icon, so in this case the TOS delta here, is replaced with 2 Terran Empire icons, which we also have among our guys. So staffing is also easy here. And here is the real kicker. Once per game, it may nullify a planet dilemma, and that's a planet-only dilemma, if at a mirror mission. So this gives us access to a nullifying tool of various difficult dilemmas, which is why we will simply have this ship in orbit and just send our 3 guys to attempt. They will be safe from villagers with torches if your opponent pulls something like that. We will trigger prepare landing party. At the start of your first mission attempt here, you may download a security personnel, universal one, which we can't do. We have already wasted our special download on Security Chief Zulu with Defend Homeworld, but sometimes you find personal combinations where you don't actually need him. So you could save that one and get a download here. If not, we will just take an equipment. I usually go for the classic tricorder since it's quite versatile. And then attempt with 3. Have a look at the first dilemma, and if it's a planet dilemma, we can immediately nullify it. So popular planet dilemmas that you might see are, for example, God, which can be quite good against Terran Empire guys with their low integrity. In this case, we just nullify it with the Terran flagship Predator. Same is true for the popular Yol Yiju, which requires a transporter skill aboard our staff ship. We don't have that at the moment, but we can just nullify it. Also, Hannonian Land Eel. With the Land Eel, I would probably just take the kill and the stop from the Land Eel because it's one that you can usually deal with quite easily. It's just a question of getting the right number of strength into play, and with our phasers that we already have, this shouldn't be too big of a deal, and then we could still maybe save the nullifying ability from the Predator for something more terrible. For example, if Denevil Neuroparasites comes next, we could also use it to nullify that. It's great against Medical Crisis. It's great against the popular entertaining display into Mila to download a transport inhibitor, and then the Tyrellian Plague Ship that has seen a lot of play. This is one way to deal with that. Or also just a big wall like Founder Secret if you cannot get past. So the idea is here to just send in some guys as sacrificial lambs here and gain intelligence, see what the first dilemma is, maybe nullify one of the dilemmas in the combination if it's a planet dilemma, and then have an easy first mission. That's the theory. At the end of the turn, of the first turn, maybe we were stopped by a terrible wall and haven't made any progress yet. At the end of the turn, we draw 1 regular and another one for 5-year mission. And then on our second turn, we have a few decisions to make. First of all, we will play more personal. If we have a ship in hand, I suggest also playing another ship. Play the skills that you don't have in play. So let's play Alpha Quadrant Dr. McCoy, Mirror Jack Whizzer, and Mirror Kyle for 3 more bodies. What we could do now is travel back with the Starship Defiant with Protect the Timeline, and then pick up reinforcements and fly back using the Temporal Conduit. Or we could also use the Temporal Conduit for our ISS Enterprise. Remember, the ISS Enterprise is now no longer in the Mirror Quadrant, but at the end of the turn it has switched to Alpha Quadrant. So it could use the Temporal Conduit now to travel or to relocate to the Alpha Quadrant here. Kirk could immediately place the objective Reap All the Glory there, which can give us 5 points. And then they could use the Temporal Conduit again to travel back there. That would of course mean that you don't have another relocation for the Starship Defiant to get back. So depending on what you have seen here on your first mission attempt, it's probably a good idea to just take turn 2 to set up more objectives, to play reinforcements and collect them. It's only turn 2. You're under no time pressure yet, so you can take this turn to sit it out and just prepare for a big attempt on turn 3. So why not just do that? We use the Temporal Conduit to set up the objective here. We use to Protect the Timeline to fly our ship back home with everything there. We draw 2 cards with the guys we can stop then, and then we have to put 2 on the bottom of the deck for the relocation with Temporal Conduit. Send to bottom of deck him, send to bottom of deck him, and then at the end of turn 2 we will draw 2 cards. On turn 3 we'll play an Alpha Quadrant Personal, we'll play a Mirror Quadrant Personal, we can play Scotty, I think we already have him in play somewhere. Yeah, he's already in play. We can play Crewman Breedal then. Or we could also do something different, and that's where the stealing part comes in. We could also play Secondary Market. If you have already wasted your Terran Flagship Predator dilemma nullifying text, you don't necessarily need or you don't need that card anymore. So what we can do now is play Secondary Market on a ship. What it says is it plays to return a ship that you have commandeered. Remember, we have commandeered this to owner's hand, and we are the owner. We ceded that card. So we can sell that ship to ourselves, return it to our hand, and for our efforts we get a whopping 10 points. So put this one in the point area. And then we can also draw 5 cards for that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And of course, I said we can still end up with our ship. We have it in our hand. With Temporal Micro Wormhole, for example, we could then download a space-time portal. And then, depending on what cards in hand, we can use the space-time portal and do a big ship dump with everything we have in our hand. In this case, it's not too impressive because we only have 3 playable personnel there, but that's really something that you want to do when you have a full hand. Maybe if you had to return a ship because it was in trouble, it was damaged or whatever. And of course, also in this case, we had extra copies of Secondary Market that we usually use as fodder for Temporal Conduit relocations. So you can also end up with a much bigger hand, and then you can get a ship to the Alpha Quadrant without waiting for the relocation there. So that's the main purpose behind it. If we don't do that, we could of course have played the Crewman Breedal just regularly, and then on turn 3 we would have a lot of guys in play. Just move them here to just see what we've got available. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 bodies, 3 good pieces of equipment, the communicator to gain an extra skill, the phaser for the attribute bonus and as help against parasites, tricorder to make sure we have the geology for the mission here. And of course, one of the dilemmas can probably be eaten by the predator, so we have very good chances of completing that mission now. We will usually always have the different classifications for prepare landing party, so that would be another 5 points in the bag. The mission itself is worth 30, bringing us to 45. Maybe we have managed to keep Chief Pitcairn alive for 5 bonus points with the assigned mission specialists, but that's not always the case, so I wouldn't plan on scoring those points. But 45 points after this planet mission is not unreasonable. We acquire the off-cell vase, but it doesn't give us any points right now, only once we have completed the mission in the Alpha Quadrant. On turn 3, we are again in the Mirror Quadrant, so we can then fly to here, and at the end of the turn, we could relocate ourselves. No, it's not working. Relocate ourselves to examine disappearance site and attempt there. And then we would try and score that for 30 points. With Reap All the Glory, we can score another 5. And then the off-cell vase would kick in and give us 15 more, since we have completed missions in 2 quadrants. And that means we are now at 95. We have various ways of scoring another 5. As I said, Chief Pitcairn can use his transporter skill there. Ensign Davis can use his treachery there. And usually this mission can also be done by Crewman Wilson alone. He has stellar cartography, science, and the treachery. But if you have the mission specialist, of course, use them. And if you don't get your mission specialists, then you should try and not forget about your taking charge objective downloads. So on turn 1, we got the prepare landing party here that gave us 5. On turn 2, we got out the Reap All the Glory that gives us 5 here. But the biggest hitter is, of course, the Fear Will Keep Them in Line. Where is it? It only plays on the mirror mission. So that's one you need to get out in time. If we have already completed the mirror mission and want to get a 2-mission win, you've wasted that opportunity. Because that one can score you 15 points. It scores you bonus points for how many weapons you have from starved Terran Empire ships. And remember, even on turn 1, we had a starved ISS Enterprise with 6 weapons, and we had a starved Starship Defiant, which with the Terran flagship Predator was +4, so that was 10 weapons. And these 2 ships only require 3 personnel to starve them. So with them in orbit, that's usually 15 points that you can also plan to have. So that would give us 110 points without mission specialist points, so potentially 120. So yes, we could also run this without the silly secondary market thing. The reason I really wanted to show it is that I've noticed that nobody ever played this. The combination of Vintaak Drydock station to get the Starship Defiant and the secondary market. Maybe nobody played it because it's a terrible idea, but I just thought the concept is fun to just grab the ship and sell it to yourself. Usually commandeering ships can only be done with stuff that your opponent has put in play or that your opponent owns. but with this weird case that you have something that is uncontrolled like the Empoghnor, you actually can commandeer a ship that you yourself have seeded. Just to let you know, I've checked with the rules master, and he also double checked with the entire rules committee, and we have the green light that this combination actually works as intended. So probably not a deck that is on the same power level as some of the others that you have seen. Also, a correctly placed dead end at one of your target missions can of course put a spanner in the works there, but that's just fair. It's still a very powerful deck. The TOS equipment are quite strong. We don't have any Niels Barris in this deck or any of the other terrible shenanigans here. It was just supposed to be a fun deck, and I hope you've enjoyed it. So I'd be happy if you also watch again next time. If you have any deck suggestions, please let me know, and until then, expand your power in the universe. Bye bye.